The community center smelled like old books and lemon cleaner, a familiar comfort on Tuesday evenings when neighbors drifted in seeking something they could not quite name, maybe connection, maybe quiet, maybe just a place to be without being alone. An old man sat near the window, his violin case open beside him. He moved with a slowness that spoke of years, not weakness. His hands rested on his knees, fingers long and slightly bent like tree branches shaped by wind. He had come here every week for 2 years, not to perform but to remember the weight of wood and string in his hands, the way music used to live inside him before retirement, before silence became his companion. Across the room a young woman watched him. She had moved to this neighborhood 3 months ago after a breakup that left her apartment too quiet and her thoughts too loud. She came to the community center hoping to fill hours that stretched too long between work and sleep. She did not expect to find an old man with a violin or the strange pull she felt toward that worn brown case. She waited until others had left, until only a few people remained scattered in chairs talking softly about grocery prices and grandchildren. She walked over her steps, careful not wanting to startle him. "Excuse me," she said, her voice softer than she intended. He looked up, his eyes the color of weathered denim, crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "Yes," he said. "I heard you play sometimes," she continued. "I was wondering if you might play something tonight, just a short tune, nothing fancy." He studied her, not with suspicion but with curiosity. People did not often ask him to play anymore. Most assumed he was too old or too tired, or that his music belonged to another time. "What would you like to hear?" he asked. She shrugged. "I don't know, something real, something that means something to you." He nodded as if her answer mattered more than the request itself. He lifted the violin from its case, the wood gleaming under the fluorescent lights. He tucked it beneath his chin, the gesture so practiced it looked like breathing. He drew his bow across the strings, testing the sound. A single clear note hung in the air, then faded. This was not planned. He had not come tonight intending to play for anyone, but something in her request felt different, not like entertainment but like an invitation. The room around them carried its usual Tuesday sounds: a faucet dripping in the kitchen, 2 women laughing softly near the coffee pot, children's voices from the daycare room down the hall. But as he began to play, those sounds did not disappear, they simply made space. His fingers found their places on the fingerboard, muscle memory guiding them through a melody his grandfather had taught him 70 years ago in a kitchen filled with the smell of baking bread and wood smoke. The tune was a lullaby sung in Ladino, a language of Sephardic Jews scattered across continents by history and heartbreak. He had not played it aloud in decades, keeping it private like a letter never sent. The first phrase rose gentle and questioning, the second answered with warmth. The melody did not demand attention, it offered itself like a hand extended in friendship. The woman who had asked him to play stood frozen, her breath caught in her throat. She had expected something cheerful, a folk song maybe, or a simple classical piece, but this was different. This music carried weight, not sadness exactly, but depth, the kind that comes from generations of love and loss held carefully in a few simple notes. Nearby an older woman named Ruth, who came every Tuesday to knit alone in the corner, paused her needles mid-stitch. She had attended these gatherings for 3 years, speaking only when spoken to, her hands always busy, her eyes always down, but now her hands stilled, the knitting slipped into her lap unnoticed. A man in his 60s who usually spent these evenings complaining about the building temperature stopped mid-sentence, his coffee cup halfway to his lips. The teenagers in the corner, who had been scrolling through phones with practiced boredom, looked up, not because someone told them to but because the air itself had changed. The old man did not notice any of this, his eyes closed, his body swaying slightly with the rhythm of a song his grandmother used to hum while stirring pots on the stove. He played not for an audience but for memory, for the ghost of a kitchen in Thessaloniki where his family had gathered before war and migration pulled them apart. The melody wove through the room, touching people in ways they could not explain. A young mother holding her sleeping baby felt tears rise for no reason she could name. An elderly man who rarely spoke thought suddenly of his own father, a fisherman who sang while mending nets on a Greek island long ago. The music did not change the room, but it changed how people inhabited it. Strangers sat straighter, shoulders softening, breaths deepening, the space between them no longer empty but filled with something shared. The young woman who had made the request felt her chest tighten, not with sadness but with recognition, as if she had heard this melody before in a dream or another life. She did not know the words, she did not know the history behind the tune, but her body knew it. Her heart recognized the truth in those notes, the truth that some songs are not meant to entertain, they are meant to connect. The old man opened his eyes halfway through the melody, surprised to find the room quiet, not artificially quiet the way people go silent when forced to listen, but naturally quiet the way a forest grows still before rain. He saw faces turn toward him, not with expectation but with openness, and for the first time in years he felt not like a performer but like a messenger carrying something fragile and precious across time. He played the final phrase, letting the last note linger, then fade into the hum of the building, the refrigerator in the kitchen, the distant traffic outside, life continuing but now colored differently. No one spoke. No one clapped. For a long moment the room existed in the space after music, that sacred pause where meaning settles into bones before words can catch up. Then the young woman whispered, "Thank you," her voice barely audible, but he heard it. He nodded, lowering the violin to his lap, his hands trembling slightly, not from age but from emotion he had not prepared for. That simple request, a casual ask for a tune, had opened a door he thought long locked inside him, and as he looked around the room at faces softened by unexpected beauty, he wondered if music ever truly disappears, or if it only waits patiently for the right moment, the right hands, the right heart to call it back to life. The evening was not over. People would resume their conversations soon. The janitor would begin turning off lights, but something had shifted, something small and enormous all at once, a thread pulled taut between strangers who moments before had been simply bodies sharing a room. Now they were witnesses to the same quiet miracle, the knowledge that beauty still moves through the world, looking for hands willing to hold it and hearts willing to receive it. The old man looked at the young woman and saw not just a stranger who liked music but a keeper of space, someone who had made room for magic without knowing she was doing it, and in that moment he understood his job was not to preserve music in a museum of memory but to let it breathe again in rooms like this, among people like these who needed its reminder that we are never as alone as we sometimes feel. He began to pack his violin away slowly, not because he was finished but because some moments cannot be extended, they can only be honored by the care with which we leave them behind, carrying their echo into whatever comes next. The first note hung in the air like smoke from a candle just blown out. It did not shout, it did not demand attention, it simply existed, a clear, pure sound that seemed to slow time itself. The old man felt the vibration travel from the strings through the wood into his jawbone, a familiar path his body remembered even when his mind forgot. He had not planned to play this melody tonight or any night really, it lived deep inside him, tucked away like a photograph kept in a drawer, too painful to look at, too precious to throw away. But her request had been simple, just a tune, nothing fancy, and something in her eyes, not pity, not curiosity, but quiet openness, had unlocked a door he did not know was still there. His fingers moved on their own, finding positions they had not visited in 40 years, muscle memory deeper than thought. The second note joined the first, then the third, a phrase unfolding like a story told without words. Across the room the young woman who had asked him to play felt her breath catch. She had expected something pleasant, a folk dance, maybe a simple classical piece, something to fill the silence while people chatted and drank coffee. This was different. This melody carried weight, not the weight of sadness but the weight of history, of hands that had held this tune through hard times, of voices that had passed it down like a treasured object too fragile to drop. She did not know the language of the song, she did not know its name, but her body recognized it. Her shoulders softened, her hands which had been clenched at her sides without her noticing now rested open at her sides. Near the back of the room an older woman sat in her usual chair, the one closest to the wall where she could watch without being watched. She came every Tuesday for 3 years, always alone, always quiet, her hands busy with knitting needles clicking softly, a rhythm that matched her heartbeat. But now the clicking stopped. Her hands stilled mid-motion, the blue yarn slipping from her fingers unnoticed. The melody wrapped around her like a blanket she had not felt since childhood. In her mind a kitchen appeared, steam rising from a pot on the stove, the smell of onions and cinnamon, a woman humming while stirring a wooden spoon, the same melody now floating from the old man's violin. She had not heard the song since she was 7 years old in a city by the sea where the streets smelled of salt and orange blossoms, where her mother sang while kneading dough, where her brother played a small violin badly but with joy. That city, that kitchen, that family had been scattered by events too large to hold in one person's heart. She had carried only fragments, memories that faded like photographs left in the sun, but this melody had not faded. It had been waiting. Tears filled her eyes, not from sadness but from recognition, the shock of finding something you believed lost forever. She did not move, she did not speak, she simply listened as the music wove through the room, touching others in ways they could not name. A man in his 60s who usually spent these evenings complaining about the building's temperature sat frozen, his coffee cup halfway to his lips, his mind suddenly filled with an image of his grandfather, a fisherman with rough hands who sang while mending nets on a dock, the same melody hummed under breath while fingers worked rope. He had not thought of that man in 20 years. A young mother holding her sleeping baby felt a warmth spread through her chest. She did not know why tears came, but they did, quiet tears that fell onto her child's blanket unnoticed. The teenagers in the corner who had been scrolling through phones with practiced boredom looked up, not because someone told them to but because the air itself had changed. The room felt different, charged with something real, something that could not be captured on a screen or shared with a like button. The old man played on, his eyes closed, his body swaying slightly with the rhythm. He was no longer in the community center with its fluorescent lights and scuffed floors. He was in his grandmother's kitchen, the walls yellow with age, the table crowded with aunts and uncles, his grandfather tuning a violin in the corner, the smell of baking bread and strong coffee filling the air. They had sung this lullaby to children to soothe them to sleep, to comfort them during storms, to remind them they were loved. The words came back to him not as language but as feeling. "Sleep, my dear one, the night is long but I am here." He had not sung those words aloud since his grandmother died. He had tucked the melody away, believing he was its last keeper, that when he died the song would die with him, a small quiet extinction no one would notice. But as he played he felt the room change, not dramatically, not with gasps or applause, but with a deepening, a softening, strangers breathing together in the same rhythm, bodies relaxing into chairs, hands finding other hands without thought. The music did not perform, it invited. It did not entertain, it connected. The old man opened his eyes halfway through the melody. He expected to see polite faces, people pretending to listen while thinking about tomorrow morning's schedule or what to cook for dinner. Instead he saw stillness. Faces turned toward him not with expectation but with openness, eyes glistening not with tears alone but with recognition, the look people get when they hear something that speaks directly to a part of them they had forgotten existed. His bow hand trembled slightly. He had played for audiences before, concert halls, university recitals, weddings, funerals. But he had never played for a room of strangers who listened like this, not as entertainment but as homecoming. The melody continued its gentle arc, rising then falling like a breath. And then something happened no one expected. From the back of the room a voice joined the violin. Thin at first, hesitant like a plant pushing through concrete after a long winter. The older woman who had been knitting stood slowly, her hands no longer holding needles but resting at her sides. Her voice carried the same melody but with different words, a harmony that fit perfectly with the violin line as if they had practiced together for years. She sang in Ladino, the same language the old man had learned from his grandfather, her accent different, older, carrying the dust of another century, another city, another life. Derm derm querido Ijico. Sleep, sleep, my dear little son. The old man faltered, his bow dipping for a moment before finding its place again. He had not heard that dialect since his grandmother died. He had not heard anyone sing those words since he was a child. He looked toward the voice, his heart pounding not with fear but with wonder. The woman stood tall despite her age, her eyes closed, her face lifted toward the ceiling as if offering the song upward. Others in the room stirred, not to record on phones, not to whisper to neighbors but to listen more deeply, to lean forward as if the melody might carry secrets meant only for those willing to hear. The young woman who had made the request felt her chest tighten with emotion she could not name. This was no longer just a tune. This was a conversation across time between two strangers who had never met yet shared a song neither knew the other possessed. The music continued, the violin and the voice weaving together separate threads becoming one fabric. The room held its breath. No one moved, no one spoke, no one reached for a phone. In that moment the community center was no longer a building with peeling paint and flickering lights. It became a vessel, a sacred space where something lost had been found, where memory stepped out of hiding and stood in plain sight. The old man played the final phrase of the verse, letting the notes hang in the air before beginning the next. He did not know what would happen next. He did not know this woman or her story. But he knew the song. And in that moment that was enough. The melody continued its gentle journey through the room, wrapping around hearts, loosening knots people did not know they carried. A man who had not spoken to his brother in 5 years thought of a childhood afternoon they had shared fishing by a river, both silent, both content. A woman who felt invisible most days felt seen, not by a person but by a song that said you belong, you are a part of something larger than yourself. The music did not solve problems, it did not erase loneliness or grief. But it reminded people they were not alone in carrying those things. That others had carried them too, across oceans, across generations, across silences that lasted decades. The second verse began softer now, the old man playing with more care, more intention, each note placed like a stone in a path meant to lead somewhere important. And the woman sang beside him, her voice gaining strength with each phrase. They were no longer two strangers in a community center. They were two branches of the same tree reaching toward the same sky. The young woman who had asked for a tune watched tears streaming down her face unnoticed. She had come here seeking distraction, something to fill empty hours. Instead she had stumbled into a moment of pure connection, a reminder that beauty still moves through the world, looking for hands willing to hold it, hearts willing to receive it. The melody continued, rising, falling, breathing. And in that simple Tuesday evening, in a plain room with folding chairs and weak coffee, something extraordinary happened. Not because anyone planned it, not because anyone expected it, but because one person asked kindly. And another answered with truth. And in between them a song waited patiently for its moment to live again. The old man lowered his bow slowly, the last note fading into the hum of the room. He looked toward the woman who had sung, her hands now resting at her sides, her eyes still closed as if listening to an echo only she could hear. For a long moment no one moved. The air itself seemed to hold still, waiting. Then she opened her eyes and looked at him, not with surprise, not with embarrassment, but with a quiet recognition, as if she had been expecting this moment for decades without knowing it. "You have his hands," she said, her voice soft but clear, carrying across the quiet room. The old man did not understand at first. "Whose hands?" he asked. "My brother's hands," she said, taking a slow step forward, her body moving with the careful grace of someone who has learned to carry weight without showing it. He played too, a small violin with a crack in the back from when he dropped it running through the market. "He never let anyone fix it," said. The crack gave the wood character. The old man felt something shift inside him, a door opening in a part of his heart he had kept locked for years. "Where are you from?" he asked, though he already sensed the answer in the shape of her vowels, the rhythm of her breath. "Thessaloniki," she said, the name landing softly in the room like a stone dropped into still water. "Before the war, before everything changed, my family lived near the waterfront. My father sold fish, my mother baked bread that smelled like honey and orange blossom. We lived above the shop, the windows always open to the sea air." The old man sat very still. "My grandfather was from Thessaloniki," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "He left in 1938 with 2 brothers and a sister, only he made it to America. The others vanished like smoke." The woman nodded slowly, as if she had been waiting for these words her whole life. "My brother was taken in 1943, she said. "I was hidden with a Christian family. I never saw him again. I heard years later he was on a train heading east, then nothing." Silence filled the space between them, not empty silence but full silence, the kind that holds stories too heavy for words. The young woman who had asked for the tune stood near the window, her arms wrapped around herself. She felt like an intruder in a sacred moment, yet she could not look away, could not leave this unfolding truth. Others in the room remained still. No one reached for phones, no one whispered to neighbors. They simply witnessed, understanding without needing details that some meetings are not accidents, that threads long broken can find their way back together across time and distance. The old man lifted his violin again, not to play but to show her the instrument, its wood worn smooth by generations of hands. My grandfather brought this with him, he said. It was all he carried besides the clothes on his back. He played on the boat crossing the ocean. Other passengers gathered around, not because the music was perfect but because it reminded them of home. The woman stepped closer, her eyes tracing the curves of the violin as if reading a map she had once known by heart. My brother had one like it, she said, smaller but the same shape. He wanted to be a musician before the world decided otherwise. The old man felt tears rise hot behind his eyes. He blinked them away, not from shame but from the sheer unexpectedness of this moment. A Tuesday evening, a simple request, a tune played without thought, and now this woman standing before him carrying pieces of a history he thought lost forever. Would you, she began, then stopped, her voice catching. Would you play again with me? He nodded. He raised the violin to his chin, drew the bow across the strings and began the melody once more. This time the woman did not wait for an invitation. She began to sing the next verse, her voice stronger now, carrying the weight of memory without breaking under it. Others in the room stirred, not to leave, not to speak, but to draw nearer, forming a loose circle around the two musicians, strangers becoming witnesses, becoming something more. A man in his 60s who had spent most evenings complaining about small things felt his throat tighten. He thought of his own father, a quiet man who rarely spoke, of the old country who kept a small wooden flute in a drawer but never played it, who died with his stories still inside him. The young mother holding her child felt a sudden urge to call her own mother when she got home, to ask about the songs her grandmother used to sing, songs she had never thought to preserve. The teenagers in the corner had put their phones away, not because anyone told them to but because something real was happening, something that could not be captured in a 15-second clip, something that demanded presence, not documentation. The melody continued weaving through the room, the violin and the voice becoming one, not perfect, not polished but true, each note carrying the weight of lives lived and lost and somehow still continuing. Halfway through the third verse the woman began to sway slightly, her body remembering a rhythm her feet had not felt since childhood. The old man watched her and saw not just an elderly woman in a community center but a girl dancing in a kitchen by the sea, her mother's hands clapping time, her brother's violin squeaking joyfully off key. He played with more feeling now, not as a performer but as a participant in something larger than himself. When the verse ended he did not stop. Instead he played the opening phrase again, an invitation. And this time another voice joined them. A man near the coffee pot, an older gentleman who had come alone every week for months, cleared his throat softly and sang a harmony line, his voice rough with disuse but true to the melody. He did not know the woman, he did not know the old man. But he knew the song. Or parts of it, fragments passed down by a grandmother who hummed while cooking, who never explained the words, just said it was a song for when the world felt heavy. Now three voices filled the room, the woman, the man and the violin, each carrying their own piece of the same story. The young woman who had started it all felt tears on her cheeks. She wiped them away, not from sadness but from the overwhelming sense that she had stumbled into something holy, not in a religious way but in the way that human connection can feel sacred when it arrives unexpected and undeserved. The music swelled, not loudly, not dramatically, but with a gathering warmth, like a fire catching hold on a cold night. People who had been sitting alone now sat shoulder to shoulder, not speaking, not needing to. A woman who had lost her husband 2 years ago felt his presence beside her, not as a ghost but as a memory softened by time, suddenly bearable. A young man who felt invisible most days felt seen, not by a person but by a moment that said your pain, your joy, your history matters even if no one has asked about it. The song continued its gentle journey through the room, each verse unlocking another memory, another connection. When the final notes began to fade, the old man played softer, letting the melody descend like a setting Sunday. The woman sang the last line alone, her voice clear and steady. Derm me alma derm. Sleep my soul sleep. Then silence. Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of completion, the kind that follows a deep breath or a long-held embrace. No one clapped. No one knew what to do with such a moment. For 10 full seconds the room existed in that sacred pause where meaning settles into bones before words can catch up. Then the woman walked to the old man and placed her hand over his where it rested on the neck of the violin. You have his hands, she repeated, her voice barely a whisper, but everyone heard it. My brother would be glad someone still plays this song. The old man covered her hand with his other one, the two of them standing there connected not by blood, not by history they shared directly, but by a thread of memory passed hand to hand across generations. I thought I was the last one, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You were never the last one, she answered. There are always keepers, we just don't always find each other. Around them the room slowly returned to life, not the life before the music, but something new, softer. People moved gently, speaking in low voices, not about the weather or grocery prices, but about memories, songs their own grandparents had sung, lullabies, half-remembered melodies that suddenly felt important to preserve. The young woman approached the two elders hesitantly. Thank you, she said simply. The woman turned to her, eyes glistening but smiling now. You asked for a tune, she said, but you gave us a gift. You made space for this to happen. Sometimes that is all magic needs, an open heart and a quiet room. The old man looked at the young woman, then at the woman beside him, then at the faces surrounding them, strangers now bound by a single song. He understood something in that moment. Music does not live in notes or instruments. It lives in the spaces between people. In the courage to ask. In the willingness to answer. In the silence that follows when hearts have been touched. The evening was not over. People would eventually leave. The janitor would lock the doors. Tomorrow life would continue with its ordinary worries and joys. But something had shifted, something small and enormous all at once. A thread pulled taut between strangers who moments before had been simply bodies sharing a room. Now they were witnesses to the same quiet miracle. The knowledge that beauty still moves through the world. Looking for hands willing to hold it. Hearts willing to receive it. And sometimes on a simple Tuesday evening in a plain community center with folding chairs and weak coffee. It finds exactly what it needs. Silence after the song did not feel empty, it felt full, like a room after rain when the air itself seems to hold more life. People did not rush to fill it with words, they simply stood together, breathing the same air, sharing the same quiet understanding that something rare had happened, not planned, not expected, but real. The old man kept his hand over the woman's where it rested on his violin. He felt the thin skin, the delicate bones, the history held in those fingers, and he knew without asking that her hands had worked hard, carried burdens, held loss, and still found their way to song. The young woman who had asked for the tune watched them not as a spectator but as someone invited into a sacred space she had not known she needed. Slowly, gently, people began to move, not away from each other but toward each other. A man who usually sat alone found himself next to the young mother. They did not speak at first, they simply stood side by side, feeling the echo of the melody in their chests. Then the man cleared his throat softly. My grandmother used to hum that tune, he said, his voice rough with disuse but warm. She never knew the words, just the melody. She said it was a song her mother sang when the world felt too heavy. The young mother nodded, her baby still sleeping against her shoulder. My great-grandmother was from Thessaloniki too, she said. I have a photograph of her standing by the sea. She looks so young, so full of life. I never knew, she sang. Around the room similar conversations began, not loud, not performative, but quiet exchanges between people who had shared chairs and coffee for months without really seeing each other. A woman who came every week to escape a too quiet apartment found herself telling a stranger about her father's violin, the one he played on Saturday mornings while making breakfast, the one stored now in a closet since he passed. The stranger listened not with pity but with recognition. "I have my mother's recipe book," she said, "the pages stained with oil and wine. She wrote notes in the margins in a language I can't read, but I keep it on my kitchen table anyway." This was the magic of the moment. It did not solve problems, it did not erase loneliness or grief, but it reminded people they carried pieces of beauty worth sharing, pieces others might recognize, pieces that could connect them across differences of age, background, experience. The old man finally lowered his violin. He did not pack it away, not yet, the moment was not finished. "Would you like to hear the rest of it?" he asked the woman who had sung with him. She nodded. "Yes, please." He raised the instrument again, but this time he did not play alone. As he drew the bow across the strings, the woman began to sing the next verse, her voice stronger now, carrying the weight of memory without breaking. And something unexpected happened. Others joined, not all at once, not with confidence but tentatively, a hum here, a whispered phrase there. People who did not know the words found themselves making sounds that fit the melody, their voices weaving together like threads in a tapestry none of them could have woven alone. The teenagers in the corner, who had arrived bored and restless, now sat forward, their phones forgotten on the table between them. One of them, a girl with dark hair pulled into a messy bun, began to sway slightly, her body responding to a rhythm she had never heard before but somehow knew. Her friend, a boy with headphones usually dangling around his neck, watched her, then closed his eyes and listened, really listened for the first time all evening. This was not entertainment, this was participation. The melody continued its gentle journey through the room, each note unlocking something in those who heard it, a memory, a feeling, a connection to something larger than themselves. When the verse ended, the old man did not stop. He played the opening phrase again, an invitation. And this time the circle widened. A man who had lost his wife the previous winter found himself singing a harmony line, his voice shaky at first, then steadying as if the song itself was holding him up. A woman who worked nights as a nurse and days caring for her aging mother felt tears fall freely for the first time in months, not tears of sadness but of release, the song giving her permission to feel what she had been too busy to feel. The young woman who had started it all stood near the window watching the scene unfold. She thought of her own grandmother who had passed 2 years ago, who had sung lullabies in a language the young woman never learned, who had stories tucked away in silence. She made a silent promise to herself to call her mother tomorrow, to ask about those songs, to record them, to learn the words before they vanished forever. The music swelled, not loudly, not dramatically, but with a gathering warmth, like hands reaching for each other in the dark, finding connection without needing to see. People who had been strangers an hour ago now stood shoulder to shoulder, breathing together, moving slightly with the rhythm, their bodies remembering what their minds had forgotten, that we are meant to share beautiful things, not hoard them, not perform them for likes or views, but offer them freely to whoever might need them. The old man played with his eyes closed, feeling not like a performer but like a vessel, something moving through him, not from him. The melody, older than he was, older than his grandfather, older than the city by the sea where it was born. It had survived wars, migrations, silences, and now it lived again in this plain room with its scuffed floors and flickering lights. When the final notes began to fade, he played softer, letting the melody descend like twilight. The woman sang the last line alone, her voice clear and steady, carrying the weight of all those who had sung it before her. Then silence returned, but different this time, not the silence of before the song but the silence after connection, the kind that feels like a held breath before something new begins. No one moved away. No one reached for coats or bags. They simply stood together in the aftermath of beauty. The woman turned to the old man, her eyes glistening but her face peaceful. "Thank you," she said. "You gave the song a home tonight. It has been wandering for so long." He shook his head gently. "No," he said, "you gave it a voice. I only held the instrument." Around them people began to speak, not about the song itself but about what it stirred in them. A man talked about his father's hands, rough from factory work but gentle when tuning his guitar. A woman shared how her mother sang while hanging laundry, the rhythm of the clothespins keeping time with the melody. These were not grand stories, they were small human moments, the kind that make up a life but rarely get told because no one thinks to ask. The young woman approached the two elders. May I ask, she said, her voice soft, how did you keep it all these years, the song I mean, when so much was lost? The woman looked at her with eyes that held decades of both joy and sorrow. You do not keep a song, she said, you let it keep you. It lives in your bones, in your breath, in the spaces between heartbeats. You do not need to remember the words, the song remembers you. The old man nodded. Yes, we think we are the keepers, but really the music keeps us. It waits patiently through silence, through grief, through years of not singing, until the moment arrives when it is needed again. He looked around the room at faces softened by shared experience. Tonight it was needed. The janitor appeared in the doorway, not to rush them out but to listen. He had heard the music from the hallway, had paused his work to stand there for a full minute, letting the melody wash over him. He thought of his own childhood in a village where songs were woven into daily life, where no one needed a stage to sing. He cleared his throat gently. The building closes in 20 minutes, he said, but take your time, I will wait. No one felt rushed, no one felt the need to prolong the moment artificially. They simply existed together in its aftermath. Slowly, gently, people began to move toward the door, not alone but in pairs, small groups, conversations continuing softly about songs their grandparents sang, about melodies half remembered, about the importance of writing things down before they disappear. The young woman helped the older woman gather her knitting, which had been abandoned on the chair during the song. Thank you, the young woman said simply. The older woman patted her hand. You asked for a tune, she said, but you created a circle. Sometimes that is all it takes, one open heart to begin. The old man packed his violin carefully, his movements slower now, not from fatigue but from reverence. He handled the instrument as if it were not wood and string but a living thing that had just performed a miracle. As people filed out into the cool evening air, they did not scatter immediately. They stood on the sidewalk in small clusters, talking, laughing softly, the kind of laughter that comes after tears, the kind that feels like healing. The young woman walked beside the older woman and the old man, neither of them speaking at first, just walking together down the quiet street, streetlights casting soft pools of gold on the pavement. The older woman broke the silence finally. I come to that place every Tuesday, she said. For 3 years I have said almost nothing to anyone. I thought I had nothing to offer, no stories worth hearing, no songs worth singing. She paused, looking up at the stars appearing in the darkening sky. Tonight I remembered I still carry something beautiful. The old man nodded. Me too. I thought the song died with my grandfather. I thought I was its last home, but tonight I learned it has many homes. It has been waiting in all of us. They reached a corner where paths diverged. The young woman hesitated, then spoke. Would it be all right if I came next week, not just to listen but to learn? I would like to know the words to carry them forward. The older woman smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. Yes, she said, come next week. We will teach you the words and you will teach someone else someday. That is how songs survive, not in museums, not in recordings, but in living voices passing from one generation to the next. They said their goodbyes not with formality but with warmth, hands touching shoulders, brief hugs, the kind shared between people who have witnessed something sacred together. The young woman walked home alone but not lonely, the melody still humming in her chest, a quiet companion in the dark. She knew tomorrow would bring its ordinary worries, deadlines, bills, the usual noise of life. But something had shifted inside her, a recognition that beauty still moves through the world, looking for open hearts, looking for quiet rooms, looking for someone brave enough to ask for a simple tune. And sometimes on a Tuesday evening in a community center with folding chairs and weak coffee, it finds exactly what it needs.